Hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Hot Mess Life Coach, Season 6, Episode 10. We're not live on Instagram yet, so we're just going to give it a second. But I promise I have done all the necessary things this time, so week 3 is the charm, and we will actually be live on Instagram when they say we can. Okay, we are live everywhere. So good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Hot Mess Life Coach, Season 6, Episode 10. I'm your host, Brian Hogan, both a hot mess and a life coach, because that is allowed. And I'm here with my co-host, Morgan Barbrett, and we are going to talk today about strategies. This is where the rubber meets the road. What can you do about the fear? Whatever fear you're dealing with, fear of rejection, fear of death, fear of abandonment, fear of not belonging, whatever they are, there are strategies that are tried and true that Mo and I have used, and they do help. And we're going to share them with you now. And we're going to share some anecdotes about how they help and when's best to use which ones and all that good stuff, so that you can, now that you know a little bit more about fear, if you've been watching for 9 weeks, we're going to get deeper now into what to do about it.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about a number of different strategies for facing and healing your fears. And as Brian and I were kind of doing our research, we already knew this, but it emerged more clearly as we were tracking down these strategies. There's kind of 2 different categories of strategies for facing and healing your fears. And the first category is more so calming down and getting the activation to deactivate, because when you're in a state of fear, obviously you have the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, all of those fun experiences. And so how do we work ourselves back to the place where we can reactivate our conscious mind and be able to then move into the second category of strategies for facing our fears, which are more so working with your mind or doing things that can help you heal more deeply. So there's the first calm down, and then the sort of build up of like your skills and your thoughts. So it's kind of, you have to climb down the ladder so that you're not actively in fear of heights, and then you can start working your way back up in a safe way that you can no longer be fearing heights, even if you're in a different height.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example too, like the latter thing, because think about it, like if you're activated, if you've ever been in a situation with somebody who isn't calm and you say to them, calm down, that does not work, right? So it simply isn't going to work. They need a change in their situation in order to calm down. Like you got to be removed from the fear trigger. If you haven't done any work on this fear, if you're afraid of heights and you're up high, then you got to get down low first, right? So that you're not in abject terror. And then from there, you can do the other strategies of, questioning the belief, exposing yourself slowly, which we'll get into these in more detail, each one, and how to go about them. But it is really important to know, like, where am I right now on my fear journey? Am I in a place where I know I have this fear and it dogs me and I want to contemplate it and get to the root of it, but right now I'm okay. I'm just sick of this fear. That's when you do all of those deepening strategies. But you don't do any of those if you're in the middle of feeling terrified. Instead, you figure out a way to shift out of being terrified. And this actually brings up one other point, which is not all fear needs to be dealt with in this way. Sometimes the fear is actually truly a gift for your survival. So like the first thing is like, is my fear rational objectively? Like, is there a real threat in this moment? If so, honor that fear impulse and remove yourself from the threat. If there isn't a real threat, then decide, okay, do I need to calm down or do I need to explore? And then go from there.
Yeah. So a shorter version of like a question that you can ask to assess whether that fear is well placed or not is just, is this fear serving me? If I'm fearful of something that genuinely is threatening my safety, then yes, it is serving me. It's helping me survive, right? Or for example, one example that I saw in an article I was reading is like, if you are in any level of abusive relationship and you're fearful of interacting with your partner or fearful of speaking to them or telling them the truth, that is a well-placed fear, because you could face consequences for interacting in any way. And so that's not necessarily like if you're in a situation like that, that's not the time to be like, "Oh, I need to work on my fear." It's like, no, you got to get out of the situation.
Hmm.
But in other cases where the fear maybe is like, oh, like I'm afraid that like this person isn't gonna like me, and therefore I'm gonna be graspy and try to make them like me. Like then your fear can cause you to act in weird ways that don't benefit you, and those are the cases where you want to work on the fear so that you can interact in your life in ways that are more productive.
Yeah, exactly. And not only does if you're living in that type of fear that you were just describing, like I'm worried that somebody doesn't like me, it's not only going to cause you to behave in ways you might not otherwise behave, but it actually can over time, if you go through life chronically this way, chronically nervous about other
Mhm.
people's opinions, or chronically nervous about where you're headed, or chronically any sort of form of fear and anxiety, you're not only shortchanging your ability to show up the way you want to, but you're
Mhm.
shortchanging your body's ability to be resilient physiologically for you also.
Oh, yeah.
So it's definitely worth figuring this out, like understanding and going towards facing our fears. That's why it's counterintuitive to face your fear because we're afraid of it. And it's a cliche to say face your fear. So we've heard it a million times and it's boring and who wants to do that, right? And yet it's so worth it. Like the benefits of it are incredible. Like I still go through life with plenty of fear, plenty of nervousness about plenty of things. I also have way less nervousness, fear, and anxiety and agita than I used to.
Yeah.
And it's a personal testament to say I enjoy life a lot more in direct proportion to how little I fear it.
Mhm.
They're directly related. My ability to enjoy my life and my ability not to fear my life. They go hand in
Yeah.
hand.
Well, and also I feel like it's important to or helpful to have the skill of working with your fear just because regardless of how fearful you are now, your fear can fluctuate drastically throughout your life. Like I was not a super fearful person when I was like a kid, and then like got a little more fear in high school when there's like, potentially more bullies around, and
Mm-hmm.
then pandemic hits, there's more fear, like depending on the events that are happening in your life, your level of fear is going to fluctuate. But if you have the skills to deal with that, process it, notice it, and reduce it, then it doesn't have to like send you on a downward spiral. It doesn't have to take over your life. It can be something that can exist and that you can work with, and then you can get back to whatever stable place you like to exist in.
Yeah, exactly. Because when we don't face the fears, what actually happens in practice is they hijack us. And so
Mhm.
by not facing them, we end up completely taken over by them. But by facing them, we get to interact with them in a way that keeps them in check, so to speak, right? By trying to avoid them and not facing them, they just chase us. They just get bigger and bigger and like, you know what I mean? Like the shadow monster, like the fear is only the little tiny thing, but the shadow is big when we run away, right? So when we
Mm,
face it's different. When we face it, we allow it to stay the size it is, and we allow ourselves to see it more clearly.
yeah.
Because if you get
Yeah.
hijacked, then what can you do? Then you have no agency. And like, actually, that's a perfect segue into my story. So because I was completely hijacked by my fear. So if you've been watching this show, you've heard me tell the story probably twice now about being held up at gunpoint and using my sarcasm power to get away, right? By rolling my eyes. So I did that and I got away. And me and my buddy, we drove home and we were like, we had two more deliveries to make. So we made them. And then we got back to the house. And like, I was literally beside myself with PTSD, right? Like I was shaking, like I had a gun in my face. My life had been threatened, like whatever. So I'm trying to calm down. I was still in like a sort of mildly alcoholic phase at the time. This was like 11 years ago. So I was drinking, you know what I mean? So now I'm completely avoiding facing
Yeah.
anything that has happened to me. That's totally avoidance tactics, right? Smoke pot, drink vodka, and distract myself with friends. Like that's what I did. The distracting myself with friends part was probably the healthiest of those three options. And yet still it was an avoidance tactic even then, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so the fear just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And I went to bed later that night, all alone. It was like 1 a.m. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with the thoughts of like that they're probably going to kill me because they know I saw their face. They probably followed us home and they know right where I live. They're probably going to get into my house and murder me any minute now. I wonder
Yeah.
if they followed us. Like I was checking for
Paranoia
details on
set
the
in.
way home. Yeah, big paranoia set in.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to work with it. Like I barely know any life coaching skills at the time. You know, I'm in the middle of a spiritual awakening, but not really at that time. And suddenly I hear like the doorknob on the front door jiggles, right? And then the door opens and I was like, literally like frozen. Like what
Yeah.
it's coming true. They're in here. They're going to kill me. So I froze. Like I was in my bed and I froze, and all the thoughts were like, you should hide under your bed. But if you move, they're going to know you're in your bed. So just stay put, right? But of course they already know you're in your bed. It's the middle of the night and you're sleeping. Like, so you've got to get out of your bed. But I couldn't move. I'm like in my bed, out of but I just froze. And then
Yeah.
I hear the body, the movement getting closer and closer through the living room. And then it ends up in the kitchen. And I was like, oh God, okay, they're searching. That's weird. And then the refrigerator opens, the freezer opens, I hear clanking. And the whole time I'm just like freaking out. And then the back door opens and suddenly dead silence. But I can tell the back door is still open. I can just tell from the rustling wind or whatever, right? So I'm like, okay. So literally probably, I don't know how long it actually was, but it felt to me like 6 hours that I laid there frozen, but it wasn't. It was like 10 minutes because it was only like 2:20 when I finally got up to check, right? But it was so long. And I went into the kitchen finally, like just to see, and there was a bottle of vodka and a shot glass on spills all over the counter. And what I realized instantaneously in that moment, that it was my alcoholic friend Jake who snuck into our house to drink our secret stash of vodka that we kept in the freezer because he was working a bartending job and didn't want to be seen drinking on the job. Like for the life of me, like I don't understand why you can't just like hide behind the bar and duck or whatever.
Oh my
You have
gosh.
to run over to my house to like steal my booze on the night that I got held up at gunpoint, which he didn't know. Fair enough, but like it freaked me out. And all of this is to say, I did not sleep that night. I did not handle that fear well, and I probably ended up on like a 4-day bender after that. Honestly, I can't remember, which is proof that there was a bender in there somewhere, right? So that is an example of how to deal with your fear poorly, very poorly.
By fully avoiding. And well, and I think that the main point of that story is that all the coping mechanisms that you use to work up until that moment in the night where somebody is in your house, like your fear was gradually building that entire time. The more avoidance tactics you use, the more like alcohol, the more whatever led you to this place where you quite literally were immobilized and could not do
Mm-hmm.
anything.
True.
But
Yeah.
the
True.
avoidance had to come before that for you to be in that kind of a state. Obviously, I don't think anybody, who has been held at gunpoint should be like we're not saying, "Oh, handle your fear better." It's not like that. It's just
Yeah.
noticing how fear operates and recognizing that there is value in having different strategies for handling it so it doesn't build up and become larger.
Yeah, become something threatening in and of itself. Because in that moment of
Yeah.
me being frozen, I felt even more threatened because I didn't have my agency. And I'm so glad that you're saying that the point about how this is not to say like, oh, handle your fear better. It isn't that at all. It's like the story is simply to demonstrate what happens when you don't
Yeah.
have the skills to handle fear well enough. It's not an indictment on any of you listening. And it's not even an indictment on me. I did my best at the time. It's
Yeah.
simply an example of what it can be like to be in the onslaught of fear with no skills versus what it can
Yeah.
be like to be in the onslaught of fear with the skills, which brings me to the other story. So that was 2010 when that happened. So it's been 14 years. So I have improved and grown and have many more skills since then. I've been a life coach for going on 5 years now. And so um a month ago, I had something happen. I'm at the end of a 2-year program to become a clinical mental health counselor to add to my life coaching repertoire. And all of my requirements for that program are done. It's been this long journey and they're done. They were done on April 4th, except for one thing, which is I needed one signature from one supervisor who has been reliable the entire time. The day I needed the signature, I texted her, I didn't hear back. For the next 15 days, I didn't hear back. I didn't hear, and I texted, I emailed, I called, I started to sink more and more into like an anxiety, a paranoia, a fear, because like this is 2 years of my hard work, right? So it's like, it's not no big deal if she drops off the face of the earth and doesn't sign it. It is a huge deal. So I was having
Yeah.
all that like stuff. It made me very, very afraid. But this time, instead of panicking and losing sleep and drinking myself into a stupor, I laid in the grass in the sunshine and I did some
Mhm.
grounding. And then I did some stuff to think through the narrative around what the thoughts were telling me, things like, oh, she's avoiding signing it because she now realizes I'm an incompetent counselor, which of course is ridiculous because she signed like
Yeah.
20 other things before that that said the
Mhm.
opposite, right? So it's clearly not that, but like my mind wants to flail around with all this crazy thinking. And I was able to go, well, okay, that thought might not be true. Do I have evidence for that? Like, you know what I mean? To grab it, to grab a hold of it. I didn't have the ability to grab a hold of any of those thoughts when I was in my bed, half drunk and high, and my buddy was stealing the vodka. Like, I had no skills. And so I was
Yeah.
stuck. This time, those skills, those different strategies allowed me in these last 3 weeks to move through my life, to live my life still, even despite the fear being there. It's not like I eradicated the fear. I made the fear manageable. That's the difference.
Mhm.
And that's the goal, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and the things that you were describing in terms of what you did, like laying in the grass and breathing, grounding, things like that, those are all categorized in like the first category of strategies, which are like the calm down ones. So I think that's a
Hmm.
good segue into talking about what are the calm down
Yes.
strategies. So one of them is grounding, right? So maybe describe a little bit what that means to you.
Yeah. So there's lots of ways to interpret grounding. For me, when I hear grounding, it's about connecting to the electromagnetic energy of the earth. That's how I feel about it. And so there's many ways to get yourself grounded, but the tried and true method that works really well for me because it's physiological in nature is to be barefoot and step on dirt.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. And or to be in the sunshine in the grass. So those methods really do help me. And like even if it's cold outside, like I'll bundle up, but I'll still take my socks off and step in the grass because the the
Really?
the connection of dirt to your feet is like you're absorbing the electromagnetic energy of the earth through your body like that. And then the cold, the added layer of the cold sort of focuses me. So like I'll do the grounding either way, even if it's summer or winter or whatever. But in the
Yeah.
winter or the fall, when the ground is cold, I actually feel the grounding more viscerally. Or maybe it's not the grounding so much, but it pulls me into the present moment more. So
Yeah.
I guess it's like your grounding and the cold exposure sort of together can happen in the winter.
Interesting. You will not catch me with my bare feet on cold grass, but that's just one of many different
Yeah.
strategies that people can use. So for me, I lean more on movement. So I exercise pretty much every day and like sometimes I'll do like jump rope or I'll do like padding like on
Hmm.
my arms and things and that just kind of helps move any, spare emotions through the body. And so I'm usually like more so thinking about like how much energy, emotional energy or fears are stored in my body and how can I like release some of that energy? And I do that through movement, but also grounding can like that having connection to energy of the earth. That's a whole different way of kind of regulating any excess, energy that's in your body. So those are just two different ways of going about it.
Yeah, exactly. And there is no wrong way. And that those are two of many ways because grounding, in essence, what you're trying to do with grounding is take your scattershot energy and consolidate it,
Hmm.
right? So whatever works to help you do that is okay. It can even be something tactile, like grounding, even though grounding at its core has to do with connecting to the electromagnetic energy of the earth. Like it doesn't mean that that's the only way, like that connecting to the energetic field is the only way. Like connect grounding can be as simple as like rubbing the tips of your fingers together with such focus and attention that you're feeling the ridges on each fingernail, right? Or on each
Hmm.
fingertip for a few
Yeah.
seconds, for 10, 20 seconds. Because it's just a way of like pulling your attention from all the things, all the thoughts, all the fears, all the emotions into, oh, okay, it's just my feet on the ground, or it's just the ridges on my finger, or I'm
Yeah.
just doing my padding right now, right? It's a way to focus you. And so grounding has a sort of secondary element to it too, which is that it helps bring you in the present moment, which is another whole strategy in and of itself. But there's overlap in these, right? Because to successfully ground, you have to get present. Once you're present, it's harder to stay in abject fear. So they're like a chain, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, and if anybody's listening to this and they're like, "Grounding, that sounds dumb. I don't have time for that." You're probably somebody that has a lot of thoughts going through your head all the time, and you are the person that would benefit from this the most. And I'm speaking about that from a place of experience, being somebody who used to really resist grounding, used to really resist, like, I specifically didn't like when people told me to, like, take a deep breath. It would, like,
Mm.
make me angry. But that is yet another, like, calming strategy where, like, if you are breathing deeply with your belly, not your chest, like, that signals to all the important parts of your brain that you're safe, that you can relax. That's like your rest and digest. Like, the the person who resists grounding, breathing, any form of regulation of their emotions, those are usually the people that have tons of thoughts just racing in their mind, and truly need it the most.
Yeah, and I'm actually in a program right now, going through a coaching program called Positive Intelligence, and one of the things that they're teaching us is how to do little 10-second reps of coming into the present moment, or getting like,
Interesting.
yeah. And so, like, even if you are one of the people listening to this and you're feeling resistant to these because I don't have time, right?
Mm,
That's just one of your mental strategies that's there to sabotage you, because you do have time, because you might not have time to go outside and take your socks off and do all that, but you do have 10 seconds to focus in on only what you're hearing, or you have 10 seconds to focus in on only what you're experiencing in your body, or only what you can touch, right? So if you do that, if you can practice every once in a while, it's called self-command in the positive intelligence language. If you practice the self-command muscle, it's basically at the root of what is under mindfulness. Like mindfulness, and there's piles and piles of research about mindfulness and why it works, right? And underneath all of that is that what you're doing is you're telling your mind to focus on one thing. And at mindfulness, you keep bringing it back to that one thing over and over, right? And that's mindfulness training. And in PQ repping, that's what we call it. It's just doing, it's the root thing that's underneath mindfulness, which is moving from this one part of your brain that has all the worries to this other part of your brain that sort of knows how to handle things. And every time you do these 10-second tactile reps, or visual or auditory, you're withdrawing energy from the worry part of the brain and adding energy to they call it the sage brain in positive intelligence. But it's just that part
mm.
of your brain that has access to clear thought and empathy, and not the fear, right? And so if you don't have time, or if you're resisting this, start with 10 seconds every hour. 10 seconds once an hour, you will notice a difference by the end of 3 days, right? So just, you can start really, really, really small.
So we talked about a few different calm down strategies for pulling ourselves out of a fear response, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what about the ones that are more thought based, that are more, we're okay, now that we're calm, we're building up our coping mechanisms, we're building up our courage. What comes to mind?
Yeah. So one thing that I love that helps me a lot is to give it a voice, to give my mind a voice. Like, you've probably
Your
heard us
fear
talk.
or your mind?
Both, whichever one. It's like it's
Okay.
my mind. I think of them as the same in this case. Like, yeah, I'm giving my fear a voice, but I'm giving my mind's fear a voice, because it's the thoughts. I'm giving voice to the thoughts, that the fear-based thoughts. Does that make sense? So then
Well,
that's
and what do
their
you
mind.
mean? Just because you're using some coaching language here, describe to somebody who has never heard of giving it a voice before. What does that mean?
I'm going to explain it. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just to answer your question.
Yeah.
It's the fear in the mind that I'm giving a voice to. And this is how it goes. Like, it's like, basically it's just saying what you're thinking out loud, and that's truly that
Okay.
simple. And because it's like I'll think something like, oh, my supervisor didn't sign that form because she knows I'm incompetent, she thinks I'm incompetent, and that's never going to get signed, and all of this is going to be 2 years of a waste. Those were literally the thoughts I was having, right?
Yeah.
As I'm saying them to you now, even, they're
Mhm.
absurd. Like, they're so ridiculous. Like, I don't want
Yeah.
to say dumb, because like I'm not dumb for thinking them, right? But the
Mhm.
thoughts, they don't have any basis in reality, but that doesn't make them dumb. It just makes them baseless, right? So they're
Yeah.
baseless thoughts, and the baselessness of thoughts like that is not apparent when they're being said to you by you silently. They just
Yeah.
feel like the truth, right? But as soon
Yeah.
as I said out loud, and this was like 2.5 weeks ago, oh, she's not going to sign my document because she thinks I'm the most terrible counselor on the planet, which is actually how it went in my head. I said it out. It's even more ridiculous,
Yeah.
right? But silently, it felt even worse. Out loud, it felt even more ridiculous. So it's like the more your mind pushes into hyperbole, how bad it could be, those are the ones to grab and say out loud because they're going to sound ridiculous to you on the face of it almost immediately, almost every time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of counterintuitive because when you're fearing something and you have this thought that feels very scary on the inside, the last thing you're going to want to do is say it out loud because it feels like it's going to make it more real.
Yeah.
But in contrast, or I guess like surprisingly, it makes it feel less real. It actually kind of
Mm-hmm.
like it's as if I'm trying to come up with a metaphor right now, but like it's as if like you have like this scary shadow in like the corner of your room and it's like moving and you think that it's some sort of monster and then you shine a flashlight on it and it's like, oh, like I just hung up a jacket on this chair and it's blowing because the fan is on, right? Like
Yeah.
and so as soon as you make it more real by speaking it, you can see it for what it is and so instead of it becoming more real as in more scary, more threatening, it does the opposite.
Yeah, it becomes more real as in apparently just made of words. It becomes
Yeah.
what it becomes more real in the sense, oh, this is really just a mist,
Mm,
but it
exactly.
feels like a monster when you just live with it alone.
Yeah.
You don't even have to
Yeah.
tell it to somebody else. You just tell it to the ether. That I do it alone. Like I'm not talking
Yeah.
about going to confide in your partner or sister necessarily, although that's healthy if you want to, right? But it's just saying it out loud. Like I'm the worst human on the planet. Okay, well that no longer sounds true. Like it sounded true
Yeah.
in my head, but when I say it out loud, it just doesn't sound as true. So
Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of the premise of the work of Byron Katie is like you pick out what is the thought that is hurting you the most and then you ask yourself like, is that true? And more often than not, because our brains like to twist stories and come up with, hurtful things, most of the time, your first instinct, the minute you ask yourself, is this true, is going to be no.
yeah. And sometimes you will insist that it's true, right? You may
Yeah.
still think you want it to be true because otherwise why are you feeling how you're feeling? And that's where these exercises come in so handy. So there's other ways like to explore, like in the work of Byron Katie, and there's other methods to do the same thing, like in acceptance and commitment therapy it's called diffusion. And one of
Mhm.
those things is just simply to like, I like to do it as like labeling what's going on in my mind, heart, and body. That's how I look at it. So it's like when I'm feeling the thing, but not if I'm terrified, just like I'm in a place to try to work through it now, right? So I'll say, okay, my mind says this is going to be a disaster. Instead of saying, I think this is going to be a disaster, I will remove it. It's not me, it's my mind. My mind thinks this is going to be a disaster. That thought makes my heart sad. Instead of I'm sad, my
Yeah.
mind says disaster. It makes my heart sad. When my heart gets sad, my body feels heavier as a result. So then I'm taking all of the things that are going on with me, but I'm not,
Mhm.
but they're not my identity. It's something happening
Yeah.
with my mind, something happening with my heart, and something happening with my body. And when I can see those things more clearly, then the difference is if they're all happening to me, then I'm not there to do anything about it. But if something's happening to my mind and something's happening to my heart and something's happening to my body, that leaves me out here able to go, oh, let me help you through this,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
which is a hugely powerful place to be. It's that adopting the witness perspective. So if you can do that, if you can be in what you're feeling and ask yourself or say to yourself, my mind is playing this role, my heart is playing this role, and my body's playing this role, then you're removed. And from that place of being removed, you have agency now to go do something about it with
Yeah.
self-kindness. Once you feel like you've got that agency, what you don't want is for the part of you that is in a rush for it to go away to jump in and say, okay, let's fix it. You got to go in there with kindness. As soon as you're able to
Mhm.
to remove from it, go back in with kindness. What do you
Yeah.
need? You know?
Yeah, and Brian's basically just drawing a distinction between a distinction between, like, going at, like, your experience just thinking, like, "Oh, I'm overwhelmed, I'm overwhelmed, I'm overwhelmed," or, "Oh, I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared." Instead of that, stepping aside from it and
Mm-hmm.
watching it.
Yeah.
watching what is happening, observing how that affects like the way that you feel in your body. And if you can watch it rather than identifying with it, saying, I am, then you're able to work with it rather than just being a victim of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's gives you back power, gives you back control. And if you guys are noticing as you're listening to us, like all of these exercises, what they have underneath as their root factor is some level of awareness. So
Mhm.
it's the big crux of all of this as you move into any form of transformation, whether that's overcoming fear or, getting out of limiting beliefs, whatever it is, it's going to be being aware of what's going on with you, shifting from the autopilot mind that culture encourages us to live in and thrive in, and instead going back to, hey, slow down. What do I feel? What do I need? What do I want? Present moment awareness. And then methodically, kindly meeting the needs that come up. Yeah. It's radical, it's countercultural, it takes time. I'm still figuring out how to get there. So just remember always, everybody, that this stuff is aspirational. We're pointing at things that we're also still trying to hit. We're
Yeah.
gonna get there together.
Yeah. And so to close today, I just want to leave people with a few thoughts of like kind of how to think about fear.
Yeah.
So I think the foundational piece is rather than thinking of yourself as being, bad or having some sort of weakness because you're afraid of something or because you're experiencing fear, think of fear as information that you can learn from. It quite literally is a data point in your experience that you can look at, observe, and then gain information, insight from, and determine how you want to react and how you want to handle it. So it's not automatically a bad thing. When
Hmm.
you are feeling fear, it's just a data point, it's just information that you can take and do with what you will. And then the other thing is when you are experiencing some sort of fear, the alternative to avoiding and the one that will usually take you to a more positive place after you have used some of the calming techniques is to start getting curious about the fear.
Mm.
What am I feeling? Why? And where might this be coming from? If you can
Yeah.
answer those questions, you're going to get more clarity, more observation, more data points that maybe you didn't have before. And then rather than the fear compressing and growing and getting out of control, you'll start to pick it apart and it will dissolve.
Yeah, exactly. Curiosity is so powerful. I'm so glad that you brought that up. In fact, if you don't have your own innate natural curiosity, it's going to be harder for you to motivate to do any of these exploratory things.
Yeah.
So just realize that you're worth it and get curious about everything that's going on with you because no
Mhm.
one else on the planet is going to be more curious about your experience than you.
Yeah. Your mind and emotions are interesting.
Yeah,
They
fascinating.
are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right on. So thank you so much, everybody, for being with us for this conversation about fear, how to face your fear, how to deal with your fear. We're going to be back next week for season 6, episode 11. A little bit more
Mhm.
on dissolving core fears. And until then, be hot, be messy, and be blessed. Much love, everybody. We will see you soon.
Bye.